Hi, it's Helen Godden, just back from Houston. Gee, it was good catching up with so many of my old friends and making new friends in the quilting industry. We had a good time indeed. I'm just back here in my studio, stitching on my Capri 18, dreaming of that Amara that we launched. Some of you will be receiving that very soon as you placed orders at Houston. But in the meantime, I wanted to get on and share our Skill Builder Quilt-a-long as promised to so many of you at Houston. So here's our panel that we have. Now it's a very specific panel with markers and things on it to help you learn particular quilting designs. So here in this video I'm going to be quilting on this panel to really help you build on those quilting skills. So let's make a start on our Skill Builder Quilt-a-long. So welcome to my Skill Builder Quilt-a-long. I'm very happy you've joined me. Now this is a very special panel that I had printed, as you can see here, designed by Helen Godden for Handi Quilter and quilted by, and you're going to pop your name in there. But what I've done with this design is added lots of little markers and guidelines, things that you might not see at first, but they're there to help you learn the skills of the specific quilting patterns I want to share with you today. So here we have this very abstract flower in the middle. We're going to start in here. So I've got black thread on my machine and I'm going to tap the foot pedal so the needle goes down, pull up that bobbin so I've got both threads on the top neatly out of the way. Now that's really good practice no matter what machine you're working on. So let's get warmed up by just stitching the black in that black outline. You're going to start to be very grateful for those heavy black outlines I've given you, because that gives us our path and a means to travel and move across the quilt, but the black thread hides in the black and only shows off in those coloured areas. So here we go, stitching around that first shape. Okay, so what I didn't tell you is, of course, I have got this sandwiched. I've actually got 2 layers of batting and just some backing fabric, and yeah, I've got it all pinned and ready to rock and roll. So the very first thing, we've gone around there. You can see I've got a little marker there that goes out to that white dot and back in again. So this is an exercise in control. It's very small movements of the hand. Still have the machine going fairly fast, because if you have the machine going too slow, you end up with big clunky stitches. I'll show you. Right, big clunky stitches. We don't want that. We want small stitches to have that machine going a little bit faster, but it doesn't mean increase the speed of your hand. Okay, even that had some clunky stitches. We want to go and get lots of little stitches around that circle. Now when it comes to quilting, for me, more is always more and is always better. So I've gone and added some extra little, kind of like stamens if you like, around the centre of that flower. Now what about the middle here? I'm going to launch into a spiral, but that is quite an oval shape, so it's going to be an oval spiral. Work into the middle and then come back out again. Now let's add some petal shapes in here. So this shape gets quite narrow here and wider there. Now that's deliberate so that we can't possibly make the petals absolutely exactly the same or completely symmetrical. I'm always looking for ways to have the design be a bit off center and not perfectly round or perfectly square, so that variations are totally suitable. And as we get out into that fatter area, those humps become quite elongated. Now we can go back around for a second echo. There we go. So we've gone around that 3 times. So that's a triple pass design to create those petal shapes there. Now something we really should do is check our tension. I'm a bit concerned now what I'm going to find. Not bad, but I can see eyelashes, because that indicates that that top thread is coming down to the bottom. So I've tightened the tension to make the top thread stay up on top. Doesn't matter how experienced a quilter you are, you still have to check that tension. So I'm adding what I think of as Statue of Liberty or a crown idea. And whenever you're doing this kind of thing around a curved shape, you can see how these all radiate from an imaginary point. Now don't squeeze it in here, just go straight into that black and let the black stitching go into the black outline of the leaf, because then it will look like the leaf is on top of that flower. So they changed a little bit in style as we went around because this shape became much smaller, so that's quite okay. So as I'm stitching here, I'm on my Capri 18 from Handi Quilter, but I must admit my mind is thinking back to Houston and all the fun we had catching up with so many different people, and we launched the new Amara, which is the 20-inch machine. Now some of you might have already taken delivery of it, which I'm very jealous. I'm still waiting for mine. I think it'll be a bit longer before I receive mine in Australia. But yeah, that new Amara 20 from Handi Quilter. What a great way to try out your new machine with one of these practice skill builder panels. Down here I'm going to show you Stack of Rocks, which is a exaggerated stipple that we then close off to make a single line of bubbles. And then closing it off. Now that's a lovely way to create your bubbles, mainly if you want them in a single line. I don't suggest you use that technique if you're trying to fill an entire area in bubbles. That's when I would revert back to the over-completing the circle technique that I teach. Let's come into this one and try something a bit different. What about the infinity symbol? Some of you might call that ribbon candy. Same thing, same end result. I quite like that. Right, when we come up to this leaf here, you might notice I have given us some grid lines and there's a little slight change of colour there. Can you see I've slightly changed the colour as a hint that we're going to do some flying geese. This is how you would mark your quilt if you were going to do flying geese. Now these marks are obviously permanent, so that's going to become part of our design. But for you on your own quilt at home, these are the kind of markers or grid lines that I suggest you make with a marker that is going to disappear. So whether that be my panda pencil or a friction pen, depending on the colour of the fabric. So you give yourself a centre line and the horizontal sort of like train tracks. And you've created a flying geese. So again, you're going to go across the horizontal up to that center point and back down again, and then use that edge. So all the guesswork is taken out of it because I know where the centre is to take my point. I know where the horizontal is. So these are the kind of markers that you should give yourself if you want to do this design on your quilt. Did you notice how I keep using the black path to hide my black thread? That's the beauty of the black. There you go. So we've just created a double flying geese. That's a lot of geese. Now you can see here I've created a little pattern. I've got a dark dot as my starting point and a little arc that comes out to the edge, back to the middle, out to the edge, back to the middle. Sometimes I think it looks like wheat. Out to the edge, back to the middle, out to the edge, back to the middle, out to the edge. Now it's kind of like a feather, but I'm getting the two sides done at once. Right, so this next area is what I call road maps. This dotted line represents what I would draw with a marker, whether it be my friction pen or my panda pencil. When you're drawing this on, you draw a curl, add another curl onto it, keep adding curls. Keep just adding one curl onto the next with your marker, And the way I think of it is this is a suburb and I'm trying to fill it with enough roads to access all the area of that suburb. So I'm trying to have those roads go into all the little nooks and crannies fairly evenly and covering the area. So now when you drive down that road, you stick to one side. So from here, I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch away from my marker and just keep following the road map all the way around my suburb, in and out of all these little streets, and guess what? I'll come back to where I started. This is when I'm teaching how to quilt feathers. This is the kind of thing I will get my students to draw, is this elongated paisley shape. It is the basic shape of a feather. I've also given myself a centre line, and on this one here I've even given myself directional lines. If you're just given endless space to put a feather in, it can end up being quite an unattractive feather. Okay, so by giving yourself guidelines, when I stitch into this, I know exactly how wide to become, and that feather will very gradually get that beautiful size increase and then turn at the edge and come back again. So from here I've got my guidelines to come out and make a small version of that paisley shape. And what you might notice is when I make a feather, I leave a tiny gap, and it doesn't matter how small or big that gap is, but a gap means that I'm making a new line. I'm not trying to stitch exactly on the previous line, but all my markers help me get this really nice and consistent. Now, on your own quilt, all these markers could be ones that iron away, wash away, disappear. They're on here to help us today, but this is to show you the kind of markers that you need to make to help you, the guidelines to help you. Now, as we come down to this section, you might notice there are a few little markers here. Okay, that is where we're going to create a spider's web. So from here, I'm going to come out to the center to create my spider's web. Now back to my marker. Okay, little markers all the way along. And we want to finish back in the middle. Now from here, the spider makes little arcs from one spoke to the next. We've even got the little spider. And we've got another feather shape here, and we're going to try a slightly different design, a bit more like a peacock feather perhaps, but rather than a paisley shape, we're going to use a slightly angled shape. And using that shape to know when it gets wider and the angle it goes, etc. Now this next area, you can see I've got some roundish shapes and I've got some spirals happening in there. So I've got a starting point, and on this one we are going to just follow that line. So I liken a spiral to a number 6, the way that we draw a 6. We go out and around and come in. This is a back to front 6, but it's still a 6. So this time we've only got the coloured pattern of the fabric to assist us, but let's give it a go. Around the outside, creating that 6 shape, and then coming back out again. Now if we get down to this next one here, I left this one for last because it's a disrupted spiral, okay? The flower is on top. So we have to do a partial spiral. And this is where I say let there be half. Let that spiral be covered by the flower. So you're only going to be stitching kind of half a spiral rather than trying to squeeze a whole one in that space and it just looking really squeezy. Okay, so it's a partial spiral. Now again, I've drawn this grid on here. Now we're going to use that grid to create cathedral windows, or some of you call it continuous curve, or some might call it orange peel. So if this was on a quilt of yours, these black markers would probably be again with something that irons or washes away. But for the demonstration, we've got those markers here to see what to do. So from here, I create that curve that goes along and touches at each of those points. Just a little gentle arc that bounces from one point to the next. They could get a bit bigger up here as the space is bigger. And when you've finished that one, you come back and close that off. I'm going to show you a slightly different technique. The end result is the same. It's really up to you. Some people will teach you to swing from this side to the other, hitting that point each time. Okay, I'm swinging this side and then that side, but hitting that little point. Now we're going to get the same end result, but I personally find this easier to just be able to say to myself, hump up the one side rather than trying to judge, swing left, swing right. It's actually a brain change every time. How good does that look? Love it. So we're going to come now here into these abstract roses. So it's still based on that number 6 spiral, but instead of being a smooth flowing line, I'm using slightly abstract straight lines joined together. So to get that actual change of direction there, I need to pause my hands. If I want it to be a smooth curve, I don't pause my hands, I keep it flowing. But for this abstract shape, you just pause for that teeny bit, the needle does a couple of stitches and you get that kind of straight corner kind of idea. So a nice little simple design, little zigzag for the leaves, but what's important is to take that zigzag right to the edges of the black shape, then it fills it. Rather than trying to avoid the black edge, let your stitching go right to that black edge. So we're getting a really nice variety on here of stitches, and we've just got one area left to go. So I'm just going to stitch down to there. Right, now what you might be able to see here is some little cross marks, which are kind of indicating a grid. Now if you were doing this on your quilt, you would mark the grid, just like we did before with the cathedral windows, knowing that that grid is going to be ironed away or washed away later. So what do we do with that grid? We come along and put the knob of a jigsaw puzzle in between the 2 points. Now it doesn't matter if it goes left or right, up or down, in or out, just a little knob shape. So like with the cathedral windows, work consistently in one direction first and then the other. Okay, now I don't put any knobs on the edges because edges of jigsaw puzzles are straight. There you go. Now that's the best kind of jigsaw puzzle. Every single piece fits, no piece is missing. And I think our work is done. The only thing you need to do now is, if you wanted to, you could get just a plain grey or cream and just stipple in the background to cure all that down. And then you need to get your Sharpie, write your name on your quilt. So quilted by, put your name in here. You could even get a red marker and add a red back, an Aussie spider. And then you can cut this out and create a little wall hanging as a reminder of the skills you've learnt today. You could use it to make a bag. It could be a cushion. There's all sorts of things you could do with this. There's lots of different designs on there. And just as a reminder, these indicating lines I've given you, the ones that will wash away or iron away when you're doing your own quilt, because you're going to use panda pencil or friction pen. On this panel, those lines will stay there as a means to remind you of how to create the designs for when you want to quilt them. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Please leave a comment below if you'd like to see more of these kind of quilt-alongs with a specific panel for skill building. Perhaps in the future there'll be more of these kind of panels available. So why don't you subscribe to my channel, follow me at Helen Godden Quilts, and keep up to date with our next skill building quilt-along that could happen anytime soon. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed that. Post some pictures of what you've done. I hope you've learnt some new tricks, and this will help remind you of how to get those patterns going on your next quilting project. Thanks very much for watching. See you later. Bye.